So I'm reading from, just for clarity, I'm reading from the English Standard Version. This is Matthew chapter 4, verse 1. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. And the tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him up to the holy city and set him on the pinnacle of the temple and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone." All right.
Okay, okay.
So that the first, I think the first few verses, verses 1 through 6, are pretty self-explanatory in terms of what's going on, and Jesus being led into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And just to note, this is actually a part of God's plan for Jesus, and it proves something big, that one, you don't mess with God, when it comes to just God Himself, but His Son, and He showed it. Jesus showed His divinity by turning against the flesh and understanding what my mom would always say growing up: not only who He is, but whom He is. Who He belongs to. So I think it's very powerful, and not to mention, the part where He says, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." It teaches us as human beings, that we are to turn away from the flesh and understand that it's not just about our material things, or even just the sustenance that we obviously need, but by understanding to fulfill yourself spiritually, not just physically, but spiritually, and understanding that coupled with what you need, your physical, then you'll be able to navigate through life. A lot of times we focus so much on our physical needs, and we put so much concern and worry in our physical needs, we forget the foundation, which is our spiritual. So I think this is and speaking of foundation, Jesus was definitely, as the kids say, standing 10 toes down. He was definitely standing 10 toes down with that one.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, 3 and 4. That spoke to me on, I guess, for the younger people out there, that's grade school. I'll just keep it at grade school. I mean, I guess it can go on in college too, but um, if you look at it, it's almost like how people were peer pressuring you or trying to tempt you to do something that you knew you shouldn't be doing, and they in your ear and they over here telling you like, man, I bet you couldn't do this. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or they over here talking about, oh, what's name was talking about you, right? You ain't gonna do nothing about it?
Mm.
I dare you. So, that's kind of like the envisionment or the scenario that popped up in my head. Um, and of course, I've seen that and I've watched people do it so many times. And I mean, the scenario in itself, and I will be going in more about how much more he tried to tempt, but yeah, that's like the number one scenario that I think about when those two patches was coming by. Like just to relate it to something that's going on today, to understand like just quiet whatever passions or anger that you have dwelling up to want to prove yourself to people or to want to react in a negative way or strike back in any sort of way. So I think it's like a perfect example of how to handle the situation.
Mhm. I definitely see what you're saying, because especially with the example of like, oh, someone's talking about you, right? Naturally, the instinct, like I know me personally, anytime I used to get told that, hey, like, this person is so and so is talking about you, it's an instant reaction for me to be like, oh, who said that? And then when the person I'm talking to happens to be the people that be like, oh, like I can't say, it just makes you well, I can only speak for myself. It makes me want to keep finding out who it is, and it feeds into that feeling of like confronting the person, because now, since nobody wants to bring air out who it is, it just makes me that much more curious, and then now I keep dying into this like rabbit hole, if that makes sense, of like you're
Mm.
finding who says something. Okay, now that I know who said something, okay, now I'm gonna confront that person like ASAP. I don't care what they're doing. I don't care what I'm doing. But we're gonna get this situation handled right now, especially when emotions are high. Chances are I'm already in an upset attitude. So when it gets so, and then for some people, when it gets to that point, they don't even want to mean some words anymore. For some people that go straight to physicality, if that makes sense. So what you're saying, David, definitely makes sense. And I think I would even agree too that 3 and 4 is like sticking out to me also, because for the audience don't know, I'll share what Bible I'm reading, but I have a study Bible, and one of the notes that I have for verse 3, where it says the stones that were in the wilderness floor they resembled small round loaves of bread in shape, size, and color. And most suggest that he was tempted to exercise supernatural power rather than depend on God's provision. Clues in the text suggest that the Spirit who led Jesus into the wilderness commanded this fast. Thus, breaking the fast prematurely would have been an act of disobedience, preventing Jesus from fulfilling every act of righteousness. So I think with that being said, and I'm definitely thinking about like, especially like culture back then, right, in the wilderness, right? Because I'm sure. Look, I need the audience to know, if you're fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, I'm pretty sure even a small loaf would also look like some food to you. Even with me currently fasting, right? I had a coworker brought in Krispy Kreme donuts yesterday, and we're talking about fresh, like fresh. I said, let me just smell it. Let me just smell it, and I'll be okay. But 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 again, like had I acted on that, right, like that breaking the fast like prematurely, right? So in the sense of like, what I'm saying is that when those are just those moments when like the flesh wants to, when the tempter wants to get you out, like wants to keep you in your flesh, to keep you out of like what God's calling for you. And it doesn't have to be fasting, right? Because all the enemy has to do is keep your eyes away from the Lord. You could be you could find out like David's example, right? You could find out someone's talking about you, right? Especially negatively. And we know what it feels like to have your name thrown in the dirt, the mud, and you don't even know who it is. Or sometimes the person that you know who it is like the person that's closest to you, and they're the ones that are throwing your dirt in your name in the dirt. And so in those moments is, what do you, like he said, what do you do then? Right? A lot of people will look at you and be like, oh, like you better go confront that. Or they try to egg on to you, be like, hey, if I was you, this is how I would handle it. Right? So kind of validating like these constructs that you're kind of having in the situation. And that makes sense. But we have to be able to remember what the Lord says about these types of things, right? What does Scripture say, right? I mean, for the audience that's out there, right, like that wants to learn more about God. I mean, the Bible is not just a book. It's not just a book of principles and what, like, this is God's breathing word, right? Like it says in the book of John that that the beginning was God. I have it right here. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning, and all things were created through him, and apart from him, not one thing was created that has been created. Right? It's literally referring to Jesus' existence since eternity. So that's all. So that's all I want to say on verses 3 and 4. And if there's Brother Anthony, is there anything did you want to chip in on anything on what we read so far?
Yeah, so I was looking at the title where it starts off with I'm in the NIV version. It starts off with the title alone says Jesus is tested in the wilderness, and what resonated with me was that it's interesting how in those moments you're tempted by what's going on in that situation. It's not just you're going to be tempted by something that's not dealing with you at that particular moment. In a moment where you're praying and you're want to do something good, you're being tested in that moment for your situation you're in. Most likely, what I've learned in the past is for things that people might struggle with. You're not going to be tempted with drugs if that's not something you struggle with. So, like I said, it resonated with me with the situation at hand and how Jesus was being tempted. He was not necessarily struggling with something, but Satan wasn't tempting him with things that he wasn't dealing with at that particular time. So that's something that I think we need to really think about when we're trying to do good, when we are dealing with a particular situation, how the enemy will try to speak to us and say, oh, you don't need to do that, or, whatever the situation is. I think that's what the enemy will attack you on. And, so that part really resonated with me because it's been situations that I've been in personally where, I hear the enemy trying to tell me, you don't need to do that, or that person doesn't deserve that. And it's just that temptation at that moment for that situation is really what we can struggle with. And then I was looking further down in my scriptures, and in the side notes, it talks about this particular situation just shows you how much we need to rely on God and not our own flesh. So.
I'll add on to that because as you were speaking about that, the main word that popped up for me is isolation. And whenever you're in that isolation and you might be going through what you're going through, heck, even it can be, you might be doing well, good even. If that one thing that can get you out of that path and sway you to the left or to the right, I think that's when he attacks the most. And I think that's what the wilderness kind of represents, that isolation place that you might be when you're trying to gather yourself. And he'll come in that moment of weakness, of extreme weakness. And in the scriptures, it was describing that, he's going 40 days, 40 nights without food. That's probably one of the weakest moments that us as humans can be in, hunger.
Mm.
So I think that's a real good description, good example of like the times where he'll attack you the most.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Something that Anthony said really resonated with me, saying that it's usually the things that we're struggling with, and as David also echoed that same sentiment. We think about Jesus being in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. Notice that the enemy didn't come to him until after the fact, knowing that, okay, I have you at your weakest, at what seems like your weakest. You're hungry now. And it says it here clearly, he was hungry. And you think about whether you've seen it in media or movies, typically when somebody's like traversing a desert for so long, two of the obvious things they struggle with is thirst and hunger. And then they'll show maybe scenes of them hallucinating or imagining things that aren't there, hearing things that aren't necessarily there because the body is being deprived. So in this case, here the enemy comes and he says he's pointing out stones to turn these stones into bread, and who knows, maybe it's these stones look like they're shaped like bread, and that's almost like a hallucination in a sense. He's hallucinating something that's not even there. But he's thinking that he has Jesus at his weakest, and that you need sustenance, obviously. But Jesus rebuts and says, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." So he's able to attack him he's able to combat the physical need with spiritual. So I thought that was something so those obviously that's like the core of that section right there. That I think the meat of it, if anything. And one thing I wanted to say too, when you were speaking, Larry, and we were talking about, someone that maybe passes gossip along, or maybe they're instigating. One of the things I started learning to do when people do that, because obviously when you're younger, you go through that a lot. Like kids will gossip, or they'll say, "Oh, that such and such is talking about you," or they'll know you don't like that person, or that person doesn't like you, and excite something. So one thing I started saying to people was like, you know what? If it's really that important, let that person come and tell me. If it's really that important, let's just let that person come and tell me. I won't even entertain myself with it. If it's really that important, let that person. I won't go through a third party. Just let that person come and tell me. If it's something really important, like allow that person to come and tell me. And that's what I tell, not to incite violence or anything, but if it's something that really needs my attention, then that person can come to me and we could talk about it. But otherwise, it's not, it's nothing that I need to be bothered with. So that's something for the younger audience out there, that if you are challenged with something like that in your life, or maybe you're challenged with things like anger, and the enemy can come in different ways and use someone close to you to make you angry. Sometimes you have to learn how to navigate with tools like that to get through those things. So